All right, kids, here we go. Well, well, I guess I can't be too surprised. We actually have comments before the stream even starts today. Asta Media says, loving the Dragonball Z. Yes, and this is actually going to be a little bit different than what we normally do. We're actually going to have a little bit of a clash of worlds here. I'm going to turn that comment off, and I'm going to go back into where we have our overlays. So let me just put that here, and then we'll get started. So, those of you, there's 3 different types of people that tend to watch this channel. Obviously, there's the first group of people that watch because they watch Go Nitro, right? Because it runs in syndication in the United States on CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, etc. So you have the sort of professional people that like to watch. You have the people that subscribe to this channel because they want to get updates on Go Nitro and those sorts of things. There are other people that like various playlists of this channel because I provide broadcasting tutorials on my own time on behalf of the company, but I often will just do them at home, which is where I am right now, just to kind of let people that are, trying to get used to preparing media for broadcast, how to do it properly so that they do not end up failing quality control. And the third side of things is, to some degree, animation. Now, today I'm actually going to talk about the importance of voice acting and getting proper vocal coaching and vocal direction. And I'm actually going to start with a little story. But before we do that, I actually need to give some congratulations to, well, I'm going to spoil it a little bit. Today I'm actually going to be talking about Chris Rager's voiceover workshop, which is really an excellent. I'm going to go into that into quite a bit more detail, so I just have to spoil it a little bit first. But I do need to give props to Christian, one of our classmates in the sessions. He actually just announced this morning that episode 14 of one of the shows that he's in is actually live on Funimation. So congratulations, Christian. You can scream with the best of them. A little bit of an inside joke. Christian, just whenever you have whatever character, Christian can do it, and especially the younger characters. And he can just scream and scream and scream and scream and scream and scream and scream for hours and hours and hours, which is perfect. You want to have a good cartoon scream. And I can speak to that. And Christian is just an upstanding guy. And everybody that was in the recording sessions over the last couple of days with Chris Rager's crew was fantastic. And that is actually what I'm going to talk a little bit about today. But I did want to start that out and give Christian a shout out because he's a really hardworking guy. And he's extremely talented. And, well, if he weren't, he certainly wouldn't be getting these kinds of parts. And he, got his start in Walla. Now, what is Walla? Well, I'm not going to go into that right now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a quick overview of my background and how we're going to seg into this. So, I am, for those of you that already know, I am the CEO of Skycron, of which there are three divisions of the company. One is obviously the television syndication arm, and that is what is responsible for Go Nitro and getting it in the various languages that it runs on. And then there is an ad agency division where we do the ads for, major Fortune 500 companies and communication for Fortune 500 companies, such as the stuff that we did with Michelin and Baskin-Robbins and those sorts of things. This is sort of the advertising stuff. But what some of you may not have known is that was not my original vocation. My original vocation and what I went to school for was for animation, classical animation to be exact. Now, I'm going to be dating myself a little bit here. Well, I'm going to be dating myself a lot here. But back in the day, if you wanted to study animation, like hand-drawn, classical, or even 3D really, but if you wanted to be an animator, there were really only 2 schools at that time that were recognized by Disney and later DreamWorks. And the first of those schools is CalArts, which was established by Walt Disney himself. And the other school, which became equally synonymous with animation, it still is Sheridan. At the time, it was Sheridan College. It was Sheridan College when I went. Then it changed to Institute, and I don't know what it is now because now they grant degrees. But Sheridan is a world-renowned animation program, and I attended it. It was a very competitive program to get in. And I had actually worked in animation before. So I was actually already kind of working to some degree as a journeyman animator, and I had done a co-op placement at a studio in Ottawa, Canada. Now, the United States and Canada have a very closely linked relationship with animation that some of you may know and some of you may not. Those of you watching in the animation world are just going to kind of dismiss this and go, yeah, well, we know that. Everybody knows that. But there's a lot of people that don't. And there is a very interesting relationship, not just between animation production, Western animation production, but also the English language dubs of anime. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a history here. Just my history, the history of the studio that I worked at, and how I went from there, and then when I transitioned back. And the reason that I'm going to tell you this story is this is actually how the voiceover stuff kind of first came about. And then I buried it for years and years, and then I went into voice direction. So it's going to sound for a little bit that I'm going back and forth and here and there and everywhere, but there is actually a point to it, so bear with me. All right, so when I was in high school, I did two things. Now, I was in a little tiny high school in a little tiny town, and it was so tiny, and the high school was so tiny, that there literally were not enough courses to provide the amount of credits that I needed to graduate. They just didn't have the resources. So the high school that I was at, they kind of bent the rules a little bit, and they said, well, you know what, Corey, you got lots of spares, and if you want, we know you want to be an animator, so if you can find an animation studio, you can co-op there and do that. So that's what I did. Now, I was born, this is not where I went to school. I went to school in a small town about 45 minutes out of downtown Ottawa, Canada. And Ottawa, Canada, the nation's capital, had and has a lot of classical animation in it. Now, the animation studio that I basically interned at was a studio called Amberwood Animation, although Amberwood went through a number of name changes. So if you're American, you would not necessarily know the studio name. And you wouldn't know the predecessors of the other names of that studio. So before that, the previous iteration of Amberwood was Lacewood. Lacewood, some of those shows did go into U.S. syndication. So the Better for Worse animated series, the late 80s and early 90s, The Best is Present, those sorts of shows, those did go into syndication. Those were done at Lacewood. I mean, it was Amberwood. It's the same studio, really, but they went through a number of changes and reorganizations. Before that, they were known as Hinton Animation Studios. Again, same studio, basically. And Hinton Animation Studios was known for the Raccoons. Again, a show that was not well known in the United States. It did have a limited run on the Disney Channel. It was they had some Disney money put into it, but the entire animation, the entire production actually, was done in Ottawa. So Ottawa has a very long history of animation. And then the previous version of that studio, again, same studio, was Atkinson Film Arts. Now, Atkinson Film Arts is a studio that Americans would know, even if they don't necessarily know the name, because they did quite a bit of syndicated programming that aired. So any kids that were growing up in the 80s that remember Teddy Ruxpin and the Teddy Ruxpin Talking Teddy Bears, Teddy Ruxpin, The Adventures of Teddy Ruxpin, that entire 65-episode television series was animated entirely and done entirely animated, and from script to screen, all the opaquing, basically painting the cells, all the animation, everything from the script up was done in Ottawa at Atkinson Film Arts. So, and they've done a lot of other fairly major productions. Atkinson was also responsible for a lot of the original Care Bears picnic specials. And then that contract ended up being passed over to Nelvana, which is another Canadian animation studio, which is based out of Toronto, which also does licensing for Beyblade and does some anime co-licensing and stuff like that. That's a long story. But basically, there is a long history with full animation in Ottawa, which was my hometown. So I was fortunate in that I was in a place where I was not too far, like less than an hour drive to basically where I was born, where these animation studios were done. And then Funbag Animation Studios was another studio that was there that was doing a lot of what we would call service work for animation. So if you wanted to be an animator, there were places that you could go. And in the old days, before animation schools, it operated somewhat like an apprenticeship, where you did the best that you could with your little portfolio, and then you basically went and you banged on doors. It's all online now, of course. But that was basically how you did it. And I was kind of a precocious big mouth. Well, was and is, I suppose, for those that really want to split hairs about it. But I called every animation studio in Ottawa, and there were a number of them. I called Funbag, and everybody was pretty good about it, but they were like, we're not taking co-op students right now. And I really wanted to animate because my uncle, he had gone to Queens and he had done 2 majors, and he basically blew like 40 grand, 50 grand, 60 grand, etc., of tuition, and then changed his major. And my parents made it very clear to me that, Corey, if you're going to go to post-secondary, we're not paying for it. You are going to pay your own way. You're going to find a way to do it yourself. And I was like, okay, all right, well, I'm going to have to find a way to deal with it. So I knew that I was going to have to be dealt with scholarship. So I knew that whatever major I picked after I finished high school, I wanted to get a good idea of what I was getting into. So I decided to call all these animation studios in Ottawa and see if they would take on a co-op kid. And most of them said no. But I did wind up calling one animation studio, and it was Lee Williams that actually picked up the phone. I don't know if he remembers this. He had a studio, I think it was Lee Williams' studio at the time. Anyway, the one studio that I did not call was Amberwood, because I was nervous, because they had done the Raccoons and Teddy Ruxpin and the Care Bear specials and all these shows that I used to watch when I was a kid. And I thought, I'm never going to get in there. So I called every single place except that one, because I just knew. I knew in my heart of hearts that I would not get in that animation studio. Now remember, this is still in high school, right? This is a co-op placement, because in Ontario you have to have a certain amount of co-op hours, because if you don't get them, you don't graduate. You aren't allowed. So if you can't find a placement in time, you're screwed. Really, there's no other way of putting it. So anyway, Lee picks up the phone, and he's very nice, and he says, you know what, Corey, I don't really have anything right now, but you know what, I like your attitude. You know who you should call? Here's who you want to call. You want to call my old boss, Ron Black. Ron Black is in charge of production at Amberwood Animation Studios, and here's his number. You tell him Lee sent you. And he gave me his number and everything, and I was just vibrating. So this was, all I wanted to be is I wanted to be an animator, and this was my shot. So I called up, Ron at the animation studio, fully expecting to get blown off. I'd never met him, right? I didn't know any of these people. I was just a kid. So I called up Ron. Ron is a very interesting character, and he is absolutely legendary, and he is the nicest guy. He was a fantastic, and taught me all kinds of stuff. And he said, so he picks up and he goes, so you want to be a co-op student, huh? You want to come and learn animation? He was an interesting guy. And I'm just like, yes, please, I would love to. And he's like, all right, well, do you have a portfolio? I'm like, portfolio? Huh? What? Like, I didn't say that, but I'm like, God, crap, I don't know what a portfolio is. Like, I don't know what to put in it. I'm like, so I'm just trying to think on my feet, and he's sort of chuckling at me on the other end of the line, because he knows damn well what's going on. He says, well, do you have a portfolio or not? So I go, well, okay, what would you like in the portfolio? Well, just bring in whatever you got, right? Because when you're 14, you're not going to know that you need to have life drawing, and you need to know your anatomy. You need to be able to draw what we would call volumetric drawing, right? Where you have construction lines, because when you're drawing thousands and thousands of individual drawings that are then photographed in sequence, what we would call anchor points make sure
that when you draw eyes or noses or whatever, they're called anchor points because they give you reference points so that they are anchored on the face. So that when you draw a different position and then you photograph them and you play them back, they don't kind of hover and jitter and whatever. When you were a kid, I don't know, when you were a kid, did you ever do flip books? I mean, I think everybody made flip books, but any of you that tried to make sort of flip books while you were kind of, screwing off in class or not listening to the teacher, and I know because I was one of those guys, where you do like the bouncing ball or a guy eating somebody or whatever, and if you remember, but you're doing one drawing at a time, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's what we would call straight ahead animation. And in animation, you don't actually want to do that because there's no way to gauge the consistency of the drawings. Now, I didn't know that yet. But what happens is then you get kind of eyes that kind of quiver and go all over the place, and then the nose kind of crawls over somewhere on the face and the mouth, right? That's why we have anchor points. But anyway, so Ron just said, just bring whatever you've got. So I go down to Amberwood and I have all my little drawings or whatever, and I'm scared stiff. And of course Ron's playing this up because he's a real old school, and Ron had been around a long time. So Ron had actually been working in animation since the late 1950s, early 1960s. So he was responsible for a lot of the Videocraft, Rankin Bass animation productions, like the Wizard of Oz cartoon, and the streets are paved with gold, and the Beatles animated special. Those were actually done at the predecessor of Atkinson Film Arts, which was Crawley Films, and Ron had been there forever. So he knew animation inside, outside, and backwards. And so I went in to see Ron, and he's sitting there, and he's silently leafing through my portfolio. And I'm just sitting there, I just want to die because I don't know if they're any good or not. I'm assuming that it's complete crap. So I'm just sitting there, and he's just leafing through it and leafing through it like a cop in Law and Order, where they're trying to kind of suss out and get in the head of whoever it is that they're questioning. He was slowly going through the drawings in my portfolio like that. Remember, I was like 14, 15 years old or something like that. I was a kid. And he goes, "Wow, what do you think of your drawings?" And I just said, "Well, that's not really for me to say. I mean, this is the best that I have. I think you would be a better judge. I would hope to get better." And he looked at me and goes, "Right answer. Can you start tomorrow?" "What? Can I start tomorrow?" So I get on the phone and I call my mom and I call the school and I'm all excited. And I literally started the next day. And I was, the co-op kid. And I was the gopher, right? But I wasn't treated like the coffee boy or the tea boy. So I was a gopher, so I did a lot of the I did a lot of the crappy stuff. But a lot of really important fundamental stuff that goes through the production pipeline. Learning how to read an exposure sheet, right? If you've never seen an exposure sheet, if you're animating, the exposure sheet actually has all of that information on it. So it has all the frames, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 24, and then the timing is actually worked out by the frame. So when you actually have an animation track, because unlike Japanese animation, in Western animation, the voices are recorded first. So the actors come in. So basically the way it works in Western animation is the script is written, like there's a treatment, then a script is written. The script is then timed. So all the individual scenes in the script are broken down, and then the storyboards are done. And then all the storyboards for each individual scene are scanned or at the time put on film and then cut into kind of like a moving comic book almost with a radio play, so that everything was timed out and you could move it all around. Then it would proceed to animation, where there would be a rough animation pass of key animation. So the key animation was every 5 frames. Although we would animate on 2s. Most Western animation that you see is done on what we would call 2s. So in order to get smooth animation, you're not actually drawing an individual drawing for every 24 frames of a second. You're actually generally drawing 12 and less. So the faster the character moves, the less spacing in between the drawings to get to that point, and the slower you want the character or whatever is being animated to move, the closer the spacing is between the drawings. But that is basically how that's done. So then it goes to in-betweening, where the individual frames are filled to smooth it out, and that's rough animation. That then goes to the cleanup department, although at Amberwood we did our own cleanup. So we were expected to do our own cleanup. So our draftsmanship ended up being really good. Those drawings would be scanned, and then in the old days they would be opaqued. So they would actually have individual cells, sheets of acetate, that were put and traced in ink on the back, or Xerox, like photocopied. They would then be turned over, and they would have a cold paint that would then be, and now of course it's scanned in and painted by computer, but it's still done by hand, and then it's composited and finished, right? So the performance actually comes first. We will do looping and passes and things like that. So when we record the dialogue, there'll be re-recorded dialogue, and there is actually a re-recording mixer or a dialogue engineer that's all they do. So that is the same in Western animation. But again, the performance and the recording is done first, and then the animation is done to the character's voice. And it's the same for television as it is for feature animation with cartoons. Disney, DreamWorks, Amberwood, doesn't matter. And I'm going to get into the voiceover in a minute, because it's sort of a, like I said, it'll bounce around a little bit, but there is actually a point, because it's a very interesting story. And this is how I'm going to kind of seg into how I came to wind up getting back into VO with Chris. So anyway, so in Japan, of course, the animation it's the reverse. The animation is actually done first, and then the performances are done after, and that's the same in Japanese as well. So that's actually the reverse. It's just a different process. It's a different approach. But anyway, so I came from a background of animation, right? And then I later went to Sheridan and I studied animation, and then I worked at bigger studios, and I worked with Chris Schouten, who was Don Bluth, one of Don Bluth's lead character designers. And Chris Schouten was a fantastic guy, but you really knew where you stood with draftsmanship. Now, when I worked in Amberwood, one of the things that I also did a lot is I was also asked to attend a lot of recording sessions with the voiceover actors. So we had guys like Rick Jones and so on and so forth that would come in, and I would be privy to the recording session. So the voice director for almost all of the shows that Amberwood was doing at the time, going all the way back to the Raccoons days, was a gentleman by the name of Gerald Tripp. Gerald was a great guy, and Gerald sort of took a shine to me, and he said, "Yeah, you know what, Corey, why don't you come to some of the recording sessions? You can take some notes. It'd be good for you. It'd be good for you. Yeah, you're sitting here animating and you want to be an animator, but it's good for you to see the performance, and it's good for you to see the actors, and it's a good thing." And so I did, and I often attended all of the recording sessions, and it was very, very interesting. And I would go to sleep hearing Gerald's voice in my head with his voice directions. Okay, let's stop that. We'll chase it. We'll cheat it in. So animation, direction for animation in general, be it Western or Japanese, is very structured, right? Because everything is so carefully planned. There's not a whole lot of frilliness. So you really have to be able to find the character. So you tend to get a lot of directors that are very clear and very specific. I personally like that, but that's just the world that I went into. So I went in as an animator that had an interest because the director of that show said, "Hey, Corey, I like you. This would be good for you to know." So that was sort of how that started. And I had actually worked at Amberwood for a while, and I kept going back long after I finished my co-op there. And I forget what we were working on. We had a slow day. We had started to source some of the animation out one of the shows, it was sort of the beginning of the real sourcing out, and there was a problem at one of the service studios that the animation was being shipped to. And, you know, what happens when you have a bunch of animators that have a little bit of time on their hands, that have finished their work and they don't have any more? Well, animators are fun people, they goof around. And I made some silly voices thinking that, you know, all the bosses were, if not gone, were busy attending to more important things, and I had a good relationship with everybody there. And I think I was doing Cobra or something, and we were just being silly, as animators have a tendency to do. And we were making fun of, you know, it was this sort of robot chicken-esque kind of thing, you know. And Cobra, any of you that grew up in the 80s and watched G.I. Joe, you know, Cobra has an absolutely ridiculous voice. I think it's the same voice actor that does Starscream. So he has that, and I, Cobra, will get the Joes. we're, you know, like Cobra, he has a very strange voice. It's not particularly masculine, but he, you know, and I was doing this voice, and I, you know, and some other voices like, hey, Yogi, or whatever, and it's like, and a bunch of others. I mean, honestly, we were just kind of screwing around, really. And, you know, we were laughing and whatever, and having a good time. Right, because, you know, we'd done our work. And then I sort of look around the corner, and then I see Ron Black and Gerald Tripp sitting there looking at me with their hands on their hips. And I'm thinking, oh shit, I am so fired. And remember, I was still a teenager at this point. I was making some coin, but, you know, I was still a teenager. And, of course, Ron and Gerald, I mean, they're kind of fun people, so they're playing this up. And they're like, and Ron's like, Gerald would like to talk to you, Corey. And I'm thinking, oh God, oh God, oh God, this is my first animation job, and I'm going to get fired, and then everybody's not going to want to work with me. And I just was like, I kept it. So I basically was walking in this big office, Ron's production office, you know, like Simba when in The Lion King, you know, after, you know, he comes back from the elephant graveyard, and Mufasa is basically going to give Simba a talking to, and he's kind of walking like, oh shit, you know. That was basically how I was. So I go in there, and I'm like, okay, well, you know what? I will take this like a man, and I will accept my fate. I will accept my being fired, you know, as my fate. And you know, so I basically stood, right? British parents, you know, what you do is you stand until you are asked to sit. So Ron goes, Corey, take a seat. And Gerald ends up taking the floor, and he goes, Corey, I heard you making some voices in the hall. Was that you? And I said, yes, sir. I'm incredibly sorry. He said, just to clarify, that was you that was making those voices. I said, yes, sir, that is true. He said, okay, I thought it was you. But I also didn't think it was you, but in a good way. And I'm like, huh? And he said, you know, Corey, I don't normally do this, but you've sat in enough recording sessions with me. You've heard the way I direct. You know how to take direction. You know how things go in the session. And I heard you do 3 or 4 really bang-on voices. Some of existing characters, but some of entirely original characters of your own making. And I don't even think that you realized that you were doing it. And to be honest with you, Corey, between what you already know, I think we are casting for The Secret World of Benjamin Bear, and I would like to have you audition. I think there's a couple of parts that I can just give you right off the bat, because I think you can do it. So if you want, would you indulge me? Well, and I'm like, gee, I don't know. And he's like, oh, come on, Corey, don't think of it as an audition. I already like you anyway. I know you can do it. He said, let's just sit down and have some fun. Let's play. And it's interesting because I heard that term, let's play, and I hadn't heard that term in a long time. And then I heard Tia Ballard say it the other day in the session, and I felt all that emotion walking by. I didn't tell her this, but it was just like this shockwave. Anyway, so Gerald goes, let's play. We'll just do it with some sides. And he goes, okay, here's a character sketch. This is basically like a paragraph. And of course, the character designs were done by the one and only Chris Schouten, who'd worked for Don Bluth, and Chris was really good. So I also had the advantage of knowing all the animators, because I was an animator, and I also knew all the character designers and everything. So it was kind of like a family. So that helped. And he said, you probably know this character, but you don't know who he is, because they'd just gotten it approved. They'd just gotten the show approved. And he said, this is Edgar Bigglebore, and he's the leader of the Teddies. You know who he is, because the Secret World of Benjamin Bear was actually a spin-off of the Teddy Bear Picnic specials from the 80s, which Lacewood did, and the renamed Lacewood Amberwood was now doing the series. So that was being done for, I think it was Family Channel, which was owned by Disney, at least in Canada. And then it's still running, I think, actually. I think it's in its like 8th season or 10th season, or I don't know what it's up to now. 20th season, who knows? It's been running a long time. Anyway, so Gerald says, this is Edgar Bigglebore. I want to see if you can do him. And the first thing I said was, okay, Gerald, well, what do you want him to sound like? Like, how old do you think he should be? Because I had done enough that I knew to ask Gerald okay, right, because I'd heard Rick Jones do it. So Gerald would give a direction, Rick Jones would just like, he's an older guy, okay, and Rick would say, okay, well, how old is he, 50, 60, 70? He's probably 60. And then Rick would do a voice, and it's like, can you take 2 years or 5 years off him? Okay, how many do you want? 2, 5, 8? 2. And then he would do it. So that I had witnessed. So Gerald says, okay, well, what I want you to do is, we'll say he's sort of 65, professorial type, and he didn't give me any other direction to start with. So what Gerald used to like to do was sort of give you a general sketch. He would hear what you had to do with it, and then he would go in and tighten it up and tighten it up and tighten it up and tighten it up. And that's what Tia does, which is very interesting. Not all directors do that, as I'd since learned, but Gerald did this. So, and I still remember the line. The line was, he said, Corey, here's the line. The line was, I'm Edgar Bigglebore, I'm the head of the Teddies, and my job is to keep the other Teddies in line. That was the line, and I don't think that line is ever going to leave me as long as I live. It's a mouthful, but it was. So I was like, okay, all right, well, I'll think of this kind of, early 60s type. So I went, and I gave him sort of a quasi-English accent. So I went, I'm Edgar Bigglebore. I'm the head of the Teddies, and my job is to keep the other Teddies in line. And Gerald said, I like that, but let's age him up a little bit. Give him a little bit more air, Corey, and let the words sit. Let the keywords sit. Find your keywords and have some emphasis, but let's give it another go. I said, okay, do you want me to age him up? He said, yeah, age him up a bit. He said, I know I said 60, and give him some air. Give him some aristocratic air. And I said, oh, okay, cool. I can do that. I'll give that a go. So then I went, and we did another read. So I went, I'm Edgar Bigglebore. I'm the head of the Teddies, and I'm Edgar Bigglebore. I'm the head of the Teddies, and my job is to keep the other Teddies in line. And Gerald goes, you know what? I really like that, and I really like that beat before in line, and I like that emphasis. I really like that choice. He said, I'm going to give you, I have one more thing that I want you to try. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but let's give it a go. he said, increase the beat between my job is to keep the rest of the teddies. He said there's a pause after the rest of the teddies. It's almost a pause. It's still a beat, but it's a really long beat to the point where it's a pause. And then I want you to give a sniff, like an aristocratic sniff, like a very English aristocratic sniff with that beat and then in line. And then have that line go up at the beginning. And I said, oh, okay. So you have this kind of nice cadence. So then that line came out as, hello, I'm Edgar Biggleball. I'm the head of the teddies, and my job is to keep the rest of the teddies in line. And he said, that's it. That's it. That's exactly it. He said, can we try a few other voices? Yeah, sure. All right, so this guy's kind of high-strung. How would he sound? Well, you know, he's sort of this Brooklynese little... He's like, hi. Oh, he's sort of this Brooklynese... He's like, yeah, like that. Oh, this other bear, he's so excited. He's just so excited just to be here. He's so unbelievably excited. You know, because his voice is cracking, you know, because he's, you know, not quite a teenager, but, you know, he's sort of in that awkward Brooklynese. He's like, I like that. And we did a bunch of different voices. Anyway, Gerald came to me later and he said, you know, Corey, I really, this is a formality, but I really want you to audition for this and some of these other characters. And I froze. I had a lot of production stuff on my plate and I was doing pretty well, but I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I didn't feel that I deserved to be there, even though everybody had been so amazingly supportive. So amazingly supportive. And I was scared to do it. And the opportunity was right there on my lap to do this voice and a number of other voices. And I just choked. And I didn't want to damage the relationship. So what I did is I suggested another friend of mine who worked at the animation studio, Kenya Pana, who ended up doing a number of voices and did very well. And Gerald and I were always friendly. He's long since retired. So, you know, but I did manage to call him and thank him many years later. But I just was nervous. I didn't think that I deserved to be there. I just was scared at the idea of doing it, and I didn't want to disappoint anybody, and I never tried. And I regretted it ever since. And I didn't have any nobody stopped offering me opportunities, but it, you know, eventually the industry changed and things sort of tapered off and we were all friendly, but I just, I never said anything about doing voiceover ever again. Then after I'd worked in animation for a while, after I finished up at Sheridan, and then I'd done work with a bunch of big ad agencies on big campaigns, I left and I started my own company to do post work. So we were doing some service animation work, some visual effects work, just basically the production equivalent of taking in laundry. And then we started getting into syndication programming in the United States and service work for Fox and places like that. And as a consequence of that, and because we had a background in visual effects, because I was used to animate, when you're used to working with things by the frame, everything else production-wise becomes easy. Not easy in the sense that it's not difficult, just when you're used to kind of planning stuff down by that detail, it is just one of those things. And as a consequence of running that studio and getting some pretty big Fortune 500 contracts in the first few years of running Skycron, the studio, you know, which we now enjoy syndication, it's like about 26 million viewer reach. But anyway, in that particular case, I was doing a lot of voice direction. And because I had done so much work in animation on the Western side, and I'd worked with Gerald, I did a lot of voice direction, and I was also used to doing a lot of looping. So we would get actors that would come in that would do lines. And every time I voice directed them, they would compliment me on how clear it was, because I was used to animation. But I hadn't really done much on the other side of the mic other than some stuff for my local television station. And as I became more successful, and as Go Nitro and some of the other stuff I was doing was starting to make some inroads in the United States, one of the voiceover artists, legendary voiceover artist that I've had the pleasure to work with on a few projects is Red Pepper. And those of you that follow the world of Hollywood, he is sort of the voice of God. He's the inner world guy, right? And before that, his mentor, so to speak, was Don Fontaine. So Don Fontaine was the legendary Hollywood voice for all these big Hollywood trailers. And then when Don Fontaine died, then Red took up the mantle. And Red actually lives in England. So this big American voice in a world, and as I say, I have English parents and I do some stuff in England as well. And because, I had done a lot of stuff with Red, and everybody wants a piece of Red because he's amazing and he's the voice. But anyway, Red and I would get along really well, and we were just shooting the shit or something after a session, and I was goofing her. And I mean, Red is at the absolute top of his game. He doesn't need anything from anybody, right? Because everybody is calling him. Universal is calling him. Fox is calling him. Disney is calling him. Everybody is calling him. He doesn't need anything. And I can't remember what the voice was that I was doing. I think I made a silly voice or whatever. I was just being sarcastic. We were talking about just something stupid that was annoying the boy. Just talking shop. And it was like, for $29.99, you too can. And I was just making goofy voices. And I wasn't trying to impress anybody because I was the voice director in that case. We were doing a spot for a commercial. Actually, it was that conversation was when we did a spot for CBC Sports, a Canadian sports broadcaster for the Rattlers. And then I had Red do the voiceover with that because I really enjoy working with Red. And Red stopped me and he goes, Corey, he's like, have you done, you must have been an actor or something before. I'm like, no, why would you say that? He goes, well, he's like, you don't give reads when you're directing, which actors generally hate. He said, but your voice is like, you're right on it. You can reproduce it. Has anybody ever told you that, yeah, you're the producer, and, obviously if you just want to do production, I wouldn't say anything, but, if you thought about maybe doing it, you're pretty good at it if nobody's ever told you. And then I told him the story about Gerald at the animation studio, and he looked at me and he said, Corey, he said, you promise me, you gotta at least find a way to do a voiceover again. And I sort of thought about it, and I thought about it. And I certainly wasn't going to go to any of the agents or the talent that I was working with for commercials, right? Because it's kind of tacky to be hiring talent for commercials and then turning around and trying to get representation. And a lot of the people that I knew in animation and Western animation had retired or moved on or whatever. So even though I had a good reputation, it was a different world and a different time, and I didn't know anybody anymore. So fast forward to, and I was like, well, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do about it, but whatever. But I thought about it, and I was like, well, if an opportunity comes up, then maybe I will. And maybe I'll do some voiceovers in some of the animated segments that we're going to start doing on Go Nitro and whatever. And my lead producer, who is also the host of Go Nitro, Emily, we had a long day editing stuff on one of the episodes for Go Nitro, and we had a lot of time to kill, and we were waiting for stuff to render, and I was waiting for something, I can't remember what, and she said, and I am also a martial artist, so I studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I'd also had kind of a rough day in class, and then I also studied Krav Maga. So any of you that watch these live streams would know. And she said, we could probably stand and watch something. Let's see what's on Amazon Prime, because we had an Amazon Prime subscription at the studio. And we had some time, nice big TV, nice big sound system. And she's like, oh, well, let's see what anime is on there. You know, just for the hell of it, really. And she said, oh, I remember this show, and I haven't seen this show in a long time. Kenichi, The Mightiest Disciple. And I was sort of like, I haven't seen it. I got time. I'll watch it. And I watched it, and it's interesting because the last time, you got to understand, when I was a kid, the anime, and Chris goes on about this a lot in his sessions. He said, when I was a kid, I didn't know it was anime, it was Japanimation when I was a kid. It was the same was true with me. So to me, anime was Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Dragon Ball Z is very, very good. Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, Inuyasha, etc. Now, I knew that Inuyasha was done, and a lot of these dubs, not all of them, but a lot of them are Funimation dubs. And we had dealt with, at Amberwood, there was some dovetail of talent because a lot of the Funimation dubs in the early days were done in Vancouver, in Canada, at Ocean Studios. So Richard Ian Cox and guys like that, that played Inuyasha. And so there's a little bit of overlap. So I'd known about that vaguely, and I watched Inuyasha when I was a kid. But when you are spending all your time animating, that's generally the last thing that you're going to be thinking about watching. So anyway, I ended up binge watching Kenichi, and what was interesting about it is I was watching it both as a viewer, kind of getting lost in the story and the performances and these very likable characters and situations. But I was also looking at it from basically the 15, 20 years of production knowledge that I gained from my time in Western animation, which is not exactly the same, but there's a lot of crossover. And on top of that, I had also learned, and just the importance of performance. And I found myself moved by a lot of the stuff in Kenichi, and I was making a note of things, but I was also forgetting about them emotionally. I was the producer part of my brain was processing, but the performance side, and I went through this, and I knew, and I am fluently bilingual. I grew up in Ottawa. I speak English and French fluently. So I also worked in French language television for a long time. So I have a lot of experience in versioning and dubbing programming from English to French and French to English. And anybody that speaks more than one language and has ever translated a script knows that it's one part science and two parts alchemy, because a direct translation is never going to do it, because words have different lengths and different meanings and different inflections and different idioms and a bunch of different things. So I had done this in French. So I've translated stuff from French to English, and I translated stuff from English to French, and I speak Quebecois French, which we call joual, and then a Parisian or international French, which is, everybody says it's different. It's not really. It's just there's a lot less contractions. It's more formal. But the core rules are the same. So I speak both, and I versioned for both of these types from English to French, and it's hard. It's really hard. It's really, really hard, because basically what you do is you translate it first. So you take your English version or your French version, and then you do just a hard pass of a translation from the first language to the language that you're translating to. So this pass doesn't have anything, doesn't worry about does it fit the space, can you dub in that area of time. It just focuses on getting all the information out, period. Then the script has to be rewritten using localized expressions in the native language that you're translating to. And I've done this in English and French many, many, many times at Skycron. Go Nitro is also produced in French. The version of that is Premier Jeu. And Premier Jeu is, it's a different kettle of fish. It's the same show, but the tone is a little different because you can't translate stuff exactly. And I remember watching Kenichi and noticing how natural the dialogue was. And aside from the fact that it was a very funny, very poignant, very touching show, and it really spoke to me, both as a martial artist and on the professional and emotionally, it really struck me just how good the work was. It's so good it's not noticeable. The only reason I noticed it is because I'd done it between English and French. And I remembered anime mainly from the fanboyish stuff, and then I worked, but I was like, you know what, a lot of this stuff is really good. I mean, it was always really good, but I thought, oh, I wonder who distributed this. I'm like, oh, Funimation did it. And I thought, oh, what the hell, I'll look up Funimation. I wonder what they're doing now, right? Because you got to remember, this is like 15 years, 20 years. And I'm like, wow, they have their own streaming service now. And now they're doing like 30, 40 shows a year, and everybody's accessible. I'm like, all right, well, I never minded being a white belt. I wonder what I can do. And I saw by chance, because every phone is listening, I'm generally not a big fan of, of predictive whatever. I mean, I'd followed some voiceover artists that I hired for commercial projects. But then sometimes the algorithm will suggest other stuff. And I saw Chris Rager's sort of Twitter feed, and then I saw that he had a course, like basically a workshop. And I thought, you know what? I don't know anybody anymore. I'm not going to go in with any expectation. It's something I can do, but I haven't really been in that world exactly. And I haven't been in it at all in a very long time. And you know what? Maybe I'll meet somebody. Maybe at the very least, I'll learn something, and I'll be able to dust off, right? Because I'm going from 10 years, so I'm a complete beginner now. I certainly knew that I would have some knowledge that would pass over, but it would give me a good kind of overview, and I thought that would be cool. So I had missed the first session. So I actually called up Chris, and we spoke, and we had a good conversation, and we talked shop a bit, and it seemed to go pretty well. And he said, as soon as I have another session, I'll let you know and sign up. And then one happened, and he let me know about it, and I signed up, and I paid right away. Now I'm going to start talking about the course. So most of the people that have or are going to be taking this course, most of them are already kind of in that world. I'm in kind of a weird position because I'm already a successful producer. I don't have to be, like nobody has to, but I enjoy the performance aspect of things, but I already have a studio. I'm hiring voice actors all the time. I'm hiring voiceover people all the time, albeit not with animation, but I'm in production. So there's a lot of common sense type stuff that you would know with looping and the free beeps and stuff that I'd already known. But most of the people, again, that are going to be doing these courses are not going to have that background, and most people that are running successful studios are not trying to do performance animation. But I've got my team, and I now have the luxury that I can put the time into it and do it properly. So I signed up, and and we basically went for it. So in my experience, it would be interesting because you would think that you'd be a little jaded if you're a producer and whatever. It's like, well, what are you going to learn? Well, I'll tell you, I learned plenty. First of all, I mean, the usual common sense stuff applies. So, but if you've never done voiceover, you've never done any production at all, you're really going to get a realistic idea of what you're going to be getting into, and there are simulated ADR sessions. And it's really structured well. And I'm talking as a producer, and I'm recommending that people take this course if they can get a spot. right? I'm speaking as somebody that, you know, it doesn't hold, like, it holds your hand, but it doesn't hold your hand. You go right into it. You're given all the information you need, and then you're going in an actual dubbing session, as Funimation does it. You know, it's all the same people, right? Patrick Morphy is the recording engineer. He's dealing with those sessions. Chris Rager is running the show, literally. He's giving acting advice, and there's also performance advice. And then, you know, Tyler and Tia Ballard and all of these amazing directors that are currently already working on major animated properties that Funimation is doing, right? They're doing One Piece, and they're doing Fairy Tail, and they're doing major series. And, you know, it also helps you to kind of get to know people so they can put a name to a face. Now, the first day was really interesting. So there's a couple of things that I'm just going to kind of go over it, and then after I go through it, then I'm going to explain everything about how it's not the same as Western animation, but then stuff that crosses over. So the first day, what Chris had us do is we were sent some sides. This was before we even started, before any of us met each other, and before any of us had done anything. So none of the rest of us in the class had met each other yet, other than in real life, you know, because a lot of the guys are local to Dallas, Fort Worth, which is where the dubbing is usually done. Well, where the dubbing is always done, and it's being done, a lot of it is being done remotely. And we basically were given sides for a video game. And we were to pick 2 characters, maximum 3. And then we were to record that with no direction given initially. The reason that no direction was given was to see where we would go with it and see where we were. And then what would happen is then Tia Ballard, she would then later analyze those auditions and give us notes. And the notes were very interesting, and I'll go into that stuff later. And Tia is a very, very good director. Everybody there is. So the first day, basically when we started, we just went into, now to be fair, a lot of the people in my class have already done dubbing work for Funimation. So Christian, I knew that he had done some work. A lot of the guys were doing Walla, which is basically background additional dialogue to just kind of fill up the track. So they were just kind of sharpening the knives in their drawer. And as I was joking about earlier, Christian can scream with the best of them, and you know, everybody in the class was extremely talented. But you know, the first thing that was a real eye opener was the terminology for Japanese dubs. So there are certain. So anybody that's ever worked in production at all, and this is the same with Western animation, or any animation or production or television at all, there are little indicators in the script that are kind of in shop lingo that describe certain things without having to take up a lot of space. And Japanese dubs have, the English script has shorthands, industry-wide shorthands that indicate what these things are, and they're very self-explanatory. One is to indicate when you're supposed to make a noise when your mouth is closed, when your mouth is open. If you clench teeth, so you get a lot of this, right? So you hear a lot of these sounds in anime a lot, but they're so common, they actually do need to have something that indicates these sounds, these non-verbals, and where they're put. And they actually have a system for these non-verbals. And none of these, I didn't know any of these, right? Because we don't use these in Western animation. That's just not how it's done, right? So that was eye-opening and really interesting, right? Because I didn't know what OM or any of these meant. I had no idea. So right off the bat, if I ran into somebody and I hadn't taken Chris's course, I wouldn't know what any of this stuff was. I might have known my way around a microphone to some degree, but I would end up going into a session and looking like, okay, well, you've done animation, but you sure as hell haven't done any anime dubs, and you don't know what this stuff is, and then it creates awkwardness in a situation that you're already kind of trying to find your feet. So that was really interesting. The other thing that I really liked that was done is we actually went through a line-by-line ADR dub for everybody, for each individual lines, and giving the exact direction that was done for, you know, for the show, which is really, really helpful. Because remember, in my background, yes, I did voice direction, and yes, I did assist with Western animation. But you got to remember that, as I said before, the performance comes first. So you're not necessarily, like, you're timing it out, but you're not slaving it to that degree. Other stuff was just kind of slipping into an old shoe. So there's 3 tones. When you go into an ADR session, there's 3 little beeps. So you got here a deet, 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 and then you visualize the 4th beep, and then that's when you start talking, right, and you dub your lines. So that I was used to, because we do that when we do re-recording and looping, particularly on TV commercials. So let's say we're shooting something in live action, and it's a rainy scene, and somebody's talking and yelling. Well, you can't get heads or tails or anything when the rain towers are going, so everybody's dialogue needs to be recorded later, and then the rain put in after the sound, right, because there's just no way to isolate it. So that 3 tones and having the claw come in. The claw comes in on some studios and others it doesn't. But that's what, you know, that was like slipping into an old shoe. But I also hadn't done a lot of the stuff in years, and to be honest, I mean, I was nervous. I mean, yeah, I'm a successful producer in my field, but you know, nobody wants to do a shitty job. This was my first go at doing proper session animation with people that I'm going to run into later if I'm fortunate enough to get any bit parts, say, and that are, that are listening to my demo, right? So, you're going to run into the same people all the time. And the same is true with television, right? You want to be a decent dude or a dudette, right? So that, you're not remembered as some jerk and get yourself blacklisted. And that's universal. That's absolutely universal. So, I wanted to put my best foot forward, and I'll be honest. I mean, I was nervous. And the first audition, we had to pick between 2 characters, and I couldn't decide. I had a gut feeling I should go for the other one, but then I thought, maybe I should try for the more MMA guy. And I was nervous, and then I had to put my goggles on so that I could see the text, and I choked. I'm like, oh, great, my first time at the mic, and it just sucks, and everybody thinks I suck, and it's terrible, and I really can do this, I really can, or whatever. It's like, and then I just sort of shut up. And then I went through, I'm like, no, I'm going to get another go at this. And then, sure enough, Chris goes, well, Corey, Corey, I think I might have you do the other character. I like what you did with some of it, but that one's not in your wheelhouse. And I was like, fuck. But then we did some other ones, and then they ended up doing really well, and then I was able to do character work. And then when I heard those 3 tones, and once I got going, I was fine. So it just goes to show that, even you can still have those nerves no matter how successful you get in a discipline that's similar but not exactly the same. But you know what? It was an incredibly welcoming atmosphere. But we were working it. They were long sessions, and the things that Chris has really managed to distill in his course, without in a very, very practical way, is stuff that I would recommend anybody take, because this is the kind of stuff that has pissed off. This is the kind of stuff that's pissed off directors of all stripes for years. People sending in auditions that have audio problems, that they call 8 million times a day. Just common sense stuff. They're not ready. I mean, I get demos sent to me all the time from voiceover guys. And some of them are just terrible. And it's like, I wish that somebody would just find a way, right? When I have time, I try to tell them, hey, you know what, you should work on it, blah, blah, blah. I didn't really give any thought on courses. So, but the stuff that Chris does in his course, the stuff that I would want any of the talent that I'm, not just because I want to do voiceover, but for anybody that I'm hiring, a lot of this stuff is really useful. Breath control, where to put emphasis on certain words, basic stuff, finding the character. If you're not as super creative or you're not used to that world, I mean, it can sound like a little bit of an artsy wank, but it is important to find the character, and sometimes you can walk through. And it was very interesting because we had done, when we were going over the auditions, some of the character work was okay. And Tia Ballard, she went through my auditions, and she said, oh, she's like, I heard your slate when you said Corey Carlick, and you have such a beautiful voice, and you have a wonderful warm tone. And she was like, I was getting all excited. And then I heard your character stuff, and some of the character stuff I really like she liked that sort of British top hat guy. And she said, but then where is that warm, beautiful voice? Where did he go? Because as soon as I transitioned in the first, she said, where did he go? I hear him a little bit like the one character, a bit, but that warm voice, that's you. I want to hear you. So she actually had me read the line. She's like, forget the accent, forget the voice. Just do it as you would do it. And then I did it, and she's like, that's what I'm talking about. And then we went back to the process of injecting it into the line. And it made a huge difference. And I'm speaking as somebody that's directed other people for commercials and television. So it just goes to show that when you're on the other side of the mic, you can still have stuff and be in your own head and not do a lot of this stuff. Because I wasn't doing it. And it just needed a little poke in the right place, and T is very good at this, and it made a world of difference. And I thought, I'll be honest, before I knew what it was, I figured, okay, well, we'll probably do some drills, well, we'll probably do some breath control, well, I didn't realize that it would be as emotionally raw in a good way, right, where you can put your emotions on the floor. You can really get inside a character or cry if you have to. If you feel the line, don't walk through it. And again, sometimes you just need to be reminded of these things or in a different way. And that was the thing that really set it apart. Very, very specific instruction, very tailored, very individual instruction and constructive criticism. We had time to go find the character, do it now, because when you go into the session, you're not going to have that kind of time. Learning how to take direction, learning how to deal with the beeps, learning how to do, learning basic etiquette if you don't know it, if you're not used to working in a studio environment. As I say, I'm successful with my own studio, but I don't know the decorum with certain studios, particularly in dubs, right? You have to respect your environment. So there were times, even though I'm a successful, producer doing syndicated programming, there were times I felt like a fish out of water. Even though I certainly had the raw talent, I felt to kind of be successful. There were times where I really felt like the junior kid in the class, and everybody in the class, a lot of them had varying levels of experience. But everybody was fantastic. Look at, not to single anybody out, but Christian. Christian's fantastic. And that humility too, right? Because Christian, he's going and taking a course like the rest of us to sharpen his skills in the toolbox. And, that's very humble, but he knows that as good as he is, he's doing everything he can to sharpen things up not just with the networking. Just do it and do it again. And Christian is fantastic, and Connor's fantastic, and Ryan is fantastic, and everybody's fantastic. You know, it was a really serious group of people that took direction really well. And at times it's humbling in the best sense. Sometimes it's good to have that humble pie, but collectively it brings things up. And you know, the cynical, you know, commercial programming guy of me, you know, and it was genuinely supportive. You know, it's like when you go into a Barnes and Noble and they have all these stupid diaries that say, oh, be your best person or whatever, and they're so phony, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, you do you and blah blah blah, but you do it in real life and everybody sniggers at you because it's all lip service. It's not. So this is a long-winded way of saying that there are some experienced people in the class. There were some people that were not as experienced in the class, although everybody was talented in their own right. And then there are people that are in a parallel and kind of in a parallel world professionally, but not in that. And I'm looking at it as a white belt. I wanted to get back into it, so I put my student hat on. And there's, you know, there's stuff that I learned that hopefully will help me book at least a bit part, right? Producing demos, no problem. I have the staff here to do it. A lot of people don't. They'd have to go to a post-production or a sound post house to do it. I own a sound post house, so at least I don't have to worry about that. But knowing how that's supposed to go. And other little things too, like, for example, the anime demo reels that you would see on, say, the character reels, the Mary Collins agency, which is the agency in Dallas Fort Worth that deals with a lot of the, if not the majority of the talent and the stuff that's coming from Funimation. There's music in it. There's music in it. There's sound. It's a little story, basically. You know, little individual pieces. See, I wouldn't have known that because in Western animation, they explicitly tell you, do not put sound effects in your reel. Do not have a produced narrative type reel. You just have slate, do your voice, no compression, no whatever, and leave it. Don't do anything to it. There should be no music. There should be no... Excuse me, I have the hiccups. There should be no music. There should be no sound. It should just be your voice. And when I was in Amberwood and we would get audition tapes, if anybody sent any character reels that had any music or any sound effects or anything other than their clear voice with nothing else in a dry studio, it would be pitched. We would dismiss it as this is not the correct way to do it. In our line of work in Western animation, right? Every industry has their own way of doing it. So now the cool thing about doing the course is I could ask Patrick Morphy, right? He's the engineer. And Chris, you know, what should I do for the reel? Should I put, that's where I found out, you know, if you can, and it's done properly, and it's polished, and it's slick, and it tells a story, it's better to have than without, right? That is the correct method accepted method for trying to get work, doing character work in the anime English dub industry. And so, if I hadn't have done the course, I wouldn't have known that. I would have assumed that it was just like a Western animation reel, character reel, where it has no music. And I would have sent the reel in that was produced. I would have had no idea, and it probably would have been chopped, right? Because it just didn't follow what that standard was. So it's what the standards of that vocation, like in that line of expertise, is, right? Because it differs due to specialty. In Western animation, we do things a little bit differently. In Japanese animation, when we're doing dubs, it's different. right? I'm new to that. So finding out what the rules are and the professional standards and expectations for what Funimation and Sentai Filmworks and so on and so forth, what is expected in that, right? Because you got to be able to follow direction. That's universal. But you also have to find the rules, and unless somebody tells you the rules, you know, you might wind up stepping into a puddle of God knows what, and then you don't get called back and you don't know why, and then if you call, you look like you don't know what you're doing, because you don't. You don't. So basically this is a long-winded way of saying this course, and I'm speaking both as a former animator, as a voice director in a related but not the same discipline, and as a aspiring voice actor, where I would like to get bit parts to do dubs, and I would like to work on the performance, and it also helps me be a better director for the productions that I have coming into Skycron and syndication and for the commercials. So it all helps elevate things above. So speaking from all of this, with the varying types of experiences that we all have, I strongly recommend that you take Chris's course. Chris's course is fantastic. He does it every couple of months, and they sell out for a reason. You know, but he'll call you and tell you, I have another session coming up, as he did me, and it's well worth the money. I would strongly recommend it. I say that as a voice talent, as an aspiring voice talent. I say that as a professional voice director, commercial voice director with 15 years experience, and I say that as a producer and as a general creative person. I have seen a lot of workshops. I have seen a lot of people come and go, and I'm not getting paid for this. I'm not being manipulated for this. I'm not sucking up or whatever as much as I would like a role, because I've been in production long enough to know it's not going to work on me if somebody's trying to get a commercial by buttering me up. And I'm doing okay, so I have nothing to lose, although I would like to have bit parts and be able to do some animation dubbing for Funimation and the like. But I have no financial incentive to tell you that I think that you should take this course. And there's a reason why everybody in my class is basically posting on Twitter, you should take the course, take Chris's course, like sign up. You know, Chris is really, really good at what he does, and Tia is really, really good at what she does, and Tyler and Patrick and everybody, they're all fantastic. And where are you going to get access to that kind of experience? And the other thing, on the flip side, by taking the course, is if this is something you want to do, you're also aware of what the expectations are. So you're making other people's lives. So you're probably going to wind up, if you're a voiceover actor, and if I'm doing, like, I'm going to run into Patrick again if I you know, ever get a bit part or a role. I'm going to run into Patrick. I'm going to run into Chris. I'm going to run into Christian. I'm going to run into Tia. It's the same as regular television, and it's the same as Western animation. Everybody knows everybody, and your attitude in the networking and all that follows. That's universal. But the skill set that you'll get is something that I would strongly recommend. I know there's a lot of people out there that want to get into production, and this is really the best way to do it. Now, the one thing that I wanted to promise, I made lots and lots of promises. I wanted to have the Twitter to kind of push, in the spirit of that positivity, I wanted to push my classmates' Twitter, you know, because they are absolutely amazing, but I didn't have everybody's Twitter handle. I probably sent the email out a bit late, and I was trying to get some graphics done in time earlier today for the broadcast. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of scrape everybody's Twitter and do it properly, and then I'm going to put everybody's Twitter in the comment section below after the broadcast. So as it says on the screen, Twitter handles for everyone in the class will be in the description below. So that's pretty much it. And the other thing I was going to say is the best way to get a hold of Chris is, I mean, he does post his phone number that he can be reached at for the course, but Twitter seems to often be the best way to go. So, if you want the next session, just check out Rager Coaster. That's Mr. Satan's handle himself on Twitter. And, and he's really good at getting back to people. And as soon as he's got something open, snipe it. Snipe it! That would be my recommendation. Ah, I see one of my classmates here. Take on the brain. Sup. Got your email. Yeah, it's good to see you. Yeah, so basically, we're all trying to make sure that you know that Rager's class is awesome. I highly recommend it for anybody that is interested in improving their skills or getting into voiceover acting and performance. It's money well spent. Again, in my line of work in commercial production, I've seen a lot of courses and, charlatans that are going out and they have their, stupid little courses, and then it's just a bunch of generic crap and you're throwing your money out the window. Believe me, I am cynical and jaded in this regard, and I have seen a lot of bullshit. This is not one of those, and I usually, even if it's okay, I will generally not push it. But I'm very impressed with what Chris has had set up, and I don't know of anything else like it. I personally haven't, and so this is something that I would recommend that you do. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about my experiences, and I wanted to basically tell you all that if you're interested in dubbing for anime, this should be your first stop. So I think that pretty much covers it. So thanks for all of you that were watching. There's a lot of you today, and a few commenters and everything, and sort of some interesting. I'm just going to post this because this amuses me. Arblugs Ukribe says Vum Ong. I don't really know what Vum Ong means, but thank you, Arblugs Ukribe. Thank you so much. I welcome your unique phraseology to whatever it is you were trying to say. And Batal Khanim says, Vum Gno. Well, Vum Gno to you too, pal. Vum Gno to you too. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So as always, and you know this is coming, if you like this or any other content that is on this channel, either by me or any of our programming, please do smash that subscribe button. And I will keep trying to get interesting content going on. And that's pretty much it for today. And as always, please do watch Go Nitro. Check your local listings for airtimes. And I should have some exciting announcements about some very big markets that Go Nitro is going to start airing in the United States soon. And we're already airing in Las Vegas, so, I don't know. What else is there? Well, I will be able to tell you very soon. And gonitro.tv. So until next time, take care, stay creative, and as always, well, I don't really have anything witty to say. So I will just end it there. All right. Have a good one, guys and ladies. Good night.